After the war in Europe ends, in 1945, the Allies set up the Nuremberg war crimes trials to bring to justice the perpetrators of wartime atrocities. One by one, the surviving senior Nazis are convicted of crimes against humanity. The Grand Mufti, Amin al-Husseini, is denounced for war crimes committed by his Bosnian SS squads in Yugoslavia. But he will never sit in a Nuremberg dock. And the reason?
Oil. The Allies needed to keep the confidence and to keep the support of the restive and fomenting Arab communities in the Middle East.
The Grand Mufti escapes justice, finding refuge in Egypt. There he resumes his activities and goes on to become one of the most influential leaders in the Arab world for the next 20 years. In the years following the Iraqi uprising, the British keep a firm grip on Iraq. The monarchy is restored, and the young King Faisal has even been to school in England. So confident are the British that some of those who took part in the coup of 1941 are released from prison. Among them is Saddam Hussein's uncle Khairallah Tulfa. Like many of his fellow pro-German rebels, Tulfa faces a difficult future. Banned from rejoining the Iraqi army, he becomes a village school teacher in Tikrit, his tribal home. It is a modest occupation, but to many young Iraqis, Tulfa is a hero. One of his deepest admirers is his young nephew, Saddam Hussein.
Saddam was basically orphaned at a very young age, probably when he was 2 or 3. He was born into a very poor family, so he was basically sent off to live with his uncle Khairallah, who lived in Tikrit, and it was through Khairallah that eventually Saddam got some semblance of an education.
Because Saddam didn't start school until he was 11, he was behind his classmates in reading and writing. He was mercilessly teased and bullied.
The one thing Saddam was good at was using his fists, and so he defended his family honor by beating people up.
The young Saddam Hussein worships his uncle, whom he sees as a freedom fighter for the Arab cause. In the coming years, Saddam will absorb from Khairallah Tulfa a hatred of the British and the Jews and a deep admiration for fascism.
This was the kind of man that Saddam Hussein was intimately connected with in the 1940s and 50s. A man who had no love for the British, who hated the monarchy. It's not really surprising that Saddam Hussein gravitates towards the Ba'ath Party.
Khairallah Tulfa writes a pamphlet voicing his anger at being excluded from the army and from politics. It is entitled, "Three Whom God Should Not Have Created: Persians, Jews, and Flies." In it, Tulfa vents his hatred of Jews, Iranians, and Kurds, and dreams of uniting the Arab world. In the aftermath of the war, the situation in the Middle East is changing fast. Thousands of Jews who have survived the Nazi campaign of extermination flee to Palestine. The British try to prevent them from settling, but the Jewish underground fights back. The Jewish resistance group Irgun blows up the King David Hotel in Jerusalem, the main British headquarters. 91 people are killed in the attack. As Palestine's Jewish population soars, tensions between Arabs and Jews reach fever pitch. Each side launches brutal attacks on the other. With Palestine spiraling into civil war, the British decide they can no longer remain. In November 1947, the United Nations announces that Palestine is to be partitioned into 2 states, one Jewish, one Arab. While the Jewish population is jubilant at the news of independence, the Arabs refuse to accept the partition plan. Bitter fighting breaks out between heavily armed Jewish and Arab militias. As the British pull out their military forces as part of the UN agreement, troops from Egypt, Syria, Jordan, and Iraq stream into Palestine to snuff out the new state of Israel. After a year of bloody battles, in which 10,000 people die, the Israelis win a decisive victory. The outcome is a violent shock to Arab nationalists, especially the young. Soon they start looking for someone to blame for the defeat. The Middle East is ripe for revolution. At the center of that revolution is the Ba'ath movement, headed by Michel Aflaq. Over the past 2 decades, the Ba'ath Party has exploded throughout the Middle East. Ba'ath is now a full-scale political force based in the Syrian capital, Damascus. Aflaq now helps to set up a new wing of the party in Iraq. Just when fascism is defeated in Europe, it returns to the Middle East in the guise of the Ba'ath Party.
For many young Iraqis, Ba'athism had quite an appeal, promising a greater future for the Arab world. It seemed to be a unification of the Arab world, getting rid of the boundaries imposed upon it by colonialism.
And they liked it, and they read it, and they joined the Ba'ath Party.
2 men strongly attracted to the party and its fascist ideology are Khairullah Tulfa and his nephew Saddam Hussein. In the 1950s, Saddam and his uncle moved to Baghdad to be closer to the political action. Tulfa makes contact with the Ba'ath Party, and under his uncle's influence, Saddam joins too.
So he was tall, handsome, you know, kind of obedient, silent, mostly because he had no education. At that time, he hadn't even completed his secondary school.
Saddam wants to join the Iraqi army as his uncle did before him, a tradition among the young men in his home district of Tikrit. But his ambitions are thwarted.
Saddam very much wanted to go to the prestigious Baghdad military academy. His problem was, because he was basically an impoverished peasant boy with a very rudimentary education, he simply didn't have the qualifications to enroll. And this was yet another source of great resentment for Saddam. And it was really because of his failure to get into the Baghdad military academy that he found himself being associated with the Ba'ath Party, which of course was in its infancy in Iraq at that time.
Less than 5 years after the Iraqi branch of the Ba'ath Party is founded, it makes its first grab for power. An alliance of army officers, Ba'athists, and communists plot to overthrow the pro-British monarchy of King Faisal.